What's up, team? It's time for that staff video update. And first, I just want to give a little hand clap for everybody who participated in Serve Day. What an incredible weekend. And when you think about all of the ministry outputs, outcomes that we have in the month of July, we've got great momentum at our weekend service, which is kind of surprising in light of what I'm used to in the summer in terms of attendance and people engaging. But we've had student camps. We just got off the heels of kids camp, and then we had an incredible Serve Day. And so just a lot to be thankful for. And I hope you could take a deep breath and breathe in some of that and thank God for some of that and rest in some of that. I know for me, I took an opportunity to hang out at Cedar Point yesterday with my boys, and that was a fun experience. And I hope you take a couple of moments before summer is off and gone to do some of the same. I wanted to spend a few minutes with you talking through some of the things that we're going to be facing culturally over the next few months. And I've actually recorded several versions of this, and I'm going to, hopefully, this will be a shorter and clear version, helping equip you for the people who are asking, what's your stance, our stance on certain issues that are going to be coming up. And if you think about it, we're starting now, headed into an election season this year and into next year with the presidential candidates, that we're going to be bombarded with these things over and over. And at some point, I'm going to share with our church how to respond in these politically challenging environments. And you're probably going to get questions, if you haven't already, like, why hasn't Ben talked about this? Why isn't Ben talking about this? Does your church care? And what's your church's stance on, from a variety of perspectives? But, oftentimes this comes from people, good intentioned people within the church, like, don't you care about these things? And at the same time, we have people within our church who are like, I'm so thankful we don't get political. And so it just gets complicated, because it's like every word that you say or don't say gets parsed and quoted, or it's not always emotionally satisfying for people. So, for context, in August, there is a special election. The first week of August, the state of Ohio is deciding, the people of Ohio are deciding, do they want to change how amendments are made to the Ohio Constitution? Currently, it is at 50% plus one. So if 50% of the people plus one vote for something, a change to the Constitution will be amended. It's been that way for about 100 some years. There's a movement to try to change that to a supermajority, from a simple majority of 50 plus one to a supermajority of 60%, as a measure to try to protect Ohio's Constitution. There's a variety of opinions around that. And you've probably heard some of them. In November, there's another issue that's being voted on to amend our Constitution, which is why it is connected to the August ballot issue. The amendment that's being proposed in November that Ohio will be voting on is to put into our Constitution reproductive rights for every individual. It's often talked about as women's rights. If you look at the issue, you can read it for yourself, and there's all sorts of potential dialogue and interpretation for how that's going to be used in the future. Now, woven within those are things that we care about, that we should care about as Jesus followers, not to mention the candidates that are going to be up for primary and then for election next year. And so the question is like, well, if you're getting asked, like, why aren't you talking about this? Is this important to you? Like, what are you afraid of? We should be speaking out, like bold, like, right? That's what the church is supposed to do. And I think there's a difference between having a solid stance on something and what it is that you use your platform for. And so I just want to explain why we do or don't do, why we do or don't do what we do, right? Did that make sense? I think so. So first and foremost, we're focused on our mission. It's not that I or we are afraid. We're not afraid of losing our 501c3 or what the media is going to say to us, or what other people are going to think. What I'm really afraid of is losing an opportunity to introduce people to Jesus unnecessarily. Like, do we need to take stands on issues? Yes, but handling a political conversation poorly could cost us a seat at the table with people who we're called to introduce to Jesus, which means if our mission is to introduce people to Jesus in the life-changing adventure with him, that means we need to have a seat at the table with people who are going to vote differently than we're going to vote, who look at our country differently than we look at our country. We're going to have to learn at least, well, as Paul would say, how to have common ground with them. You can read about it in 1 Corinthians 9. Start in 19. If you want, hit pause on the video. And for those of you that read that and you're back, 19, read verses 19 through 23. I mean, basically, Paul is like, hey, even though I'm a free man, I'm not a master to any, I'm not mastered by anybody. I make myself a slave to everyone. That's harsh language. That's not just like a cute thing to say. He was intending to shock people. Like, I become a slave to everyone. And as you read through, why? So that he can find common ground, so that he might save some. Common ground does not mean be a chameleon. It doesn't mean you're just blending in to be popular, to blend in like you're spineless. It means finding the areas where we can meet together so that we can talk about the things that are different or that maybe really matter. And so, is it messy? Yes. I mean, people would oftentimes rather have a simple slogan that they can get behind than step into the nuanced and difficult work of trying to build influence with people who look at our world differently. And so that's really the mission of our church. I believe the way that we change our culture is through people encountering the life-changing message of Jesus. And so I don't want to lose influence in that arena unnecessarily. So then maybe you're like, well, Ben, what about these issues? These issues are really important. And I would say, yes, all of these issues are really important. And so what should we be telling our church to do? Well, first, I think it's helpful to encourage them to vote. We've been given the gift of having a voice. And I know voting politically, some people are like, I don't know that I can even do that anymore. But the truth is, we have an opportunity to use our voice. And I think it's wise to use it when we can and when we feel led and when there's important issues. I think the second thing is to be intentional with our vote, not just show up for what makes sense to us, but bring our Jesus kingdom perspective to the polls. And that gets complicated and nuanced. Why? Because a lot of these issues are complicated and nuanced. They're oftentimes not as simple as either side makes them out to be. And so that means we got to be informed and we got to think about it in order for us to be intentional. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is to be gracious. To be gracious with the people who vote differently than we vote, which means be gracious in our language and the way that we speak out about these things. Why? Because God has put people in your life where you may be the only expression of Christ that they get. And so, can his spirit fix a misspeak? Well, okay, yes. But I do think we're invited to be as wise as serpent and as gentle as doves in these situations. And that's really what we're trying to do. And so that's why we don't use our platform for these issues. Because in Ephesians 4, here's what Paul says. I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. What's he saying to the church in Ephesus and to you and me? We haven't been called by the United States of America or by any other nation or ethnicity. We've been called by God, who's higher than that. And the call is to lead a life worthy of the gospel. The gospel says that even while we were sinners, Christ died for us. And so in order for us to lead a life worthy of the gospel, if we are going to live a life like that, what is he informing us to do? He goes on, always be humble, always be gentle, be patient with each other, make allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. And that's, Paul could have said anything, and that's how he invites us to live a life worthy of the calling of the gospel. In Romans 12:18, Paul says it this way, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone, And so that's kind of the filter that we're using, common ground, binding ourselves together with humility and peace. And so what does that mean? That means our primary cultural challenges that we face are going to be won by people being introduced to Jesus primarily. That's our primary strategy. We're going to stay focused on that. Number two, regardless of who gets elected or what issues passed, we're still called to be the church. And so number three, let's not sacrifice our opportunity to live out the Great Commission because of some of these issues handled flippantly or poorly or without our broader audience in mind. So what that means is you're going to hear things like, hey, this is my perspective on the issue, but I may be wrong. Hey, this is the way that I think the Bible is teaching it, but there may be others who view this differently. That's not trying to be wishy-washy. It's trying to demonstrate humility and gentleness and keep a seat at the table for those who may view this differently, who God wants us to play a role in helping them take their next step spiritually. And so that's why we do what we do. And my hope is that even though this was a little bit longer, I don't know that I actually saved time, but I think it's helpful in framing out the heartbeat that I believe God has given our church, the incredible gift and role that we play in our community, regardless of what other Christians may say about us in the midst of it. I think our mission is far too important, and God's heartbeat for the lost is too strong for us to really try to get distracted with some of these other things. And so thanks for going on the adventure with us. And at the end of the day, I think whether we get it all right or wrong, I think God's grace through us will be some of the light that he uses to impact our community and our world. Thanks.